Elara Vance moved through the hushed opulence of Arthur Sterling's penthouse suite, her practical shoes barely whispering on the polished marble. The air thrummed with the silent tension of a battle being lost. Billionaire Sterling, a titan of industry, lay unresponsive despite the gleaming array of cutting-edge tech and the watchful eyes of the world's most lauded specialists. Doctors Thorne and Gupta, their voices sharp with authority, poured over data, their frustration a palpable current in the sterile perfection. Elara, a quiet nurse often overlooked, stood beside the crystal water carafe, a faint, almost imperceptible metallic tang teasing her senses. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Has anyone considered the water? It has a particular note." Dr. Thorne scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Nurse Vance, we're dealing with advanced neurotoxicology, not a sommelier's tasting session." Dr. Gupta added, a patronizing smile, "Perhaps stick to charting, Elara." Humiliation burned in her cheeks, but as she was dismissed, her gaze lingered on Sterling's pallid face. They saw only a simple nurse. They didn't see the silent, unwavering certainty within her, the deep-rooted knowledge that their gleaming machines had overlooked something vital, something she instinctively knew was wrong. The silence that followed Dr. Gupta's patronizing dismissal felt heavier than usual, pressing in on Elara like the weight of every expectant gaze in the room. Her cheeks still burned, but the heat wasn't just shame, it was a slow, simmering indignation, a quiet defiance that refused to be extinguished. She was a simple nurse, yes, but her instincts, honed by a lifetime spent observing the subtle language of the natural world, were rarely wrong. And they were screaming now. She wasn't explicitly ordered to leave the penthouse suite, only to stick to charting. So, Elara retreated to the nurse's station just outside Sterling's direct line of sight, her fingers mechanically inputting data, her mind a whirlwind of replayed images and subtle sensory cues. The suite, designed to soothe and impress, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping not just Sterling but also the truth. The atmosphere in the penthouse was a constant hum of muted activity, the quiet beep of monitors, the hushed consultations of the medical elite, the rustle of expensive fabrics. Dr. Thorne, the lead physician, a man whose tailored suits were as impeccable as his academic credentials, moved with an air of unshakable authority. His gaze, when it occasionally flickered towards Elara, was one of bored tolerance, the kind reserved for minor, easily managed logistical concerns. Dr. Gupta, the renowned diagnostician, had a way of speaking that made every word sound like a pronouncement from an oracle, his intellect a shield against any challenge. They were brilliant, lauded, and utterly, blindly confident in their own scientific dominion. Later that afternoon, Sterling's condition took another bewildering turn. His tremors worsened, and a faint, purplish mottling appeared on his extremities, alarming the already beleaguered medical team. The suite buzzed with renewed urgency. More specialists were called in for consultation, screens glowed with complex diagnostics. Elara, observing from her station, saw the subtle tightening around Dr. Thorne's lips, the flicker of genuine concern in Dr. Gupta's usually impassive eyes. They were running out of answers, yet their resolve to find them through conventional means only hardened. A new aide, a junior nurse named Chloe, brought a fresh carafe of water to Sterling's bedside, along with a bucket of glistening ice. Elara's eyes, trained to catch the minutest aberration, fixated on the ice. It wasn't perfectly clear. There was a faint, almost iridescent shimmer to some of the cubes, a telltale sign she'd seen before in remote mountain springs where certain mineral deposits were high. It was subtle, barely noticeable in the opulent crystal pitcher, but to Elara, it was like a beacon. And the scent, that faint metallic tang, almost imperceptible, was stronger now, blooming subtly around the ice bucket. It was a familiar, uncomfortable sensation, reminiscent of the water from an old, discarded well back home that had been contaminated by runoff from an abandoned mine. Driven by an urgent, almost desperate premonition, Elara hesitated, then approached Dr. Thorne, who was huddled with Dr. Gupta over a new set of lab results. "Doctors," Elara began, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the low murmur of their conversation. They both looked up, their expressions ranging from polite irritation, Thorne, to intellectual impatience, Gupta. "Forgive me, but I've noticed something about the ice in Mr. Sterling's water. It has a peculiar iridescence, and there's a distinct metallic scent." Dr. Thorne straightened, his immaculate posture radiating disdain. Nurse Vance, we've already addressed this. Your observations regarding the water are noted, but irrelevant. We are dealing with highly complex neurological parameters, not a faulty refrigerator. His tone was like a scalpel, precise and cutting. Dr. Gupta sighed, running a hand over his bald pate. Elara, with all due respect, your intuition is not a diagnostic tool here. We have performed exhaustive analyses of every consumable item Mr. Sterling has ingested, down to the trace elements. The water, the ice, everything is pristine. Perhaps you're suffering from olfactory fatigue from the disinfectants. Just then, a sleek, immaculately dressed woman with an air of formidable efficiency swept into the room. This was Ms. Valerie Albright, Arthur Sterling's personal assistant, whose loyalty to her boss was matched only by her snobbish disdain for anyone she deemed staff. Her eyes, cold and assessing, swept over Elara, then settled on the doctors. Doctors, Mr. Sterling's sister is en route from Zurich. She expects answers, not delays, Ms. Albright announced, her voice a clipped, authoritative whisper. Her gaze then snagged on Elara, who stood awkwardly, still holding her ground near the medical huddle. Nurse Vance, is there a reason you are distracting the medical team from their critical work? Elara felt the familiar prickle of humiliation, but the image of Sterling's worsening condition spurred her on. Ms. Albright, with all due respect, I believe there's a vital detail being overlooked regarding the water Mr. Sterling is consuming. The ice. Ms. Albright cut her off, her perfect red lips forming a thin, tight line. Nurse Vance, are you suggesting that a team of world-renowned specialists, with their advanced degrees and cutting-edge equipment, have overlooked something as rudimentary as water quality? Are you qualified to make such an assertion? Her voice, though low, carried an icy edge that sliced through the tense quiet of the room. Your duties are to assist, not to speculate, and certainly not to offer unsolicited, unsubstantiated theories to professionals who are operating at the pinnacle of their field. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Ms. Albright's arm. Valerie, please. Nurse Vance is simply trying to be helpful, in her own way. However, her hypothesis, while perhaps well-intentioned, is entirely unsubstantiated and outside the scope of her expertise. He turned to Elara, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, controlled tone. Nurse Vance, I believe I was quite clear. Your input on this particular matter is neither required nor, frankly, welcome. I suggest you return to your charting duties immediately. Any further attempts to interfere with the diagnostic process will be considered a serious breach of protocol and will be formally addressed. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threat. Several junior doctors and nurses, who had been listening with barely concealed fascination, quickly averted their gazes. The message was clear. Elara Vance, the unassuming nurse, had overstepped, dared to question the elite, and had been summarily put back in her place. The public humiliation was complete, her simplistic observation ridiculed by the combined forces of academic pride and social snobbery. Elara felt the burn of their collective dismissal, the heavy weight of their scorn. Her face flushed, her hands clenched imperceptibly at her sides. She nodded, a stiff, formal movement, and turned to walk away. But as she retreated, her gaze again lingered on Sterling's pallid face, his tremors now more pronounced. They saw a simple nurse, dismissed and humiliated. They didn't see the silent, unwavering certainty within her, the deep-rooted knowledge that their gleaming machines had overlooked something vital, something she instinctively knew was wrong, and that her unique, unscientific perception was Sterling's last, unheard hope. The humiliation stung, but it also hardened her resolve. She might be sidelined, but she would not be silenced. Not when a life hung in the balance. The urgent beeping from Arthur Sterling's monitors sliced through the opulent penthouse suite, each red flash a warning of impending catastrophe. His breathing grew shallower, his chest heaving with alarming effort, the tremors in his limbs now a violent, unsettling shudder. Dr. Thorne, frustration twisting his meticulously composed features, snapped his gaze from the failing readouts to Elara. Nurse Vance, he began, his voice dripping with the condescension of a man forced to address an inconveniently buzzing fly. We are grappling with multisystemic failure compounded by a rare genetic predisposition. This isn't a case for rustic insights about your well water. This suite's bespoke filtration system is state-of-the-art, designed for absolute purity and beyond reproach. He punctuated his remark with a humorless chuckle, inviting Dr. Gupta to join in the intellectual jest. Dr. Gupta, his intellectual pride wounded by the patient's rapid decline despite their best efforts, added, "Indeed, Dr. Thorne. Our diagnostics have exhaustively analyzed every micronutrient, every heavy metal, every pathogenic possibility in Mr. Sterling's system and environment. To suggest a mere mineral residue or unusual aroma is not only unsubstantiated but frankly an insult to our collective expertise and the very science we practice." Ms. Albright, Sterling's personal assistant, a woman whose every line and angle radiated sharp, controlled authority, stepped forward. Her voice, a low, chilling whisper, was aimed solely at Alara. "Nurse, Mr. Sterling requires empirically proven science, not conjecture rooted in folklore or personal anecdotes. Perhaps you should focus on the duties you were actually hired for before you become a liability to his care." The implication of incompetence and impending dismissal hung heavy in the air, a direct, cold threat to Alara's professional standing. Alara felt the familiar burn of humiliation, her quiet presence shrinking under their collective scorn. She tried to speak, to articulate the subtle metallic tang she detected in the humidifier's steam, the faint, unnatural earthiness in the filtered water. The way these barely perceptible cues connected precisely to Sterling's unique physiological responses, clues her rural upbringing had trained her to see. But Dr. Gupta cut her off with an impatient wave. "Please, nurse. We have no time for unsubstantiated theories. The patient is declining. We need a new course of treatment, not a distraction." Sterling groaned, a pained, guttural sound that seemed to drain the oxygen from the room. The monitors flared crimson, a constant, piercing alarm now blaring with increasing urgency. His skin, already ashen, turned a ghastly blue, his lips faintly cyanotic. Alara watched, her quiet observation missing nothing, the worsening tremors, the gasping breaths, the specific, almost imperceptible spasms in his left hand that betrayed an escalating systemic distress. Her intuition screamed. This was not merely a genetic predisposition or a cardiac event, it was something foreign, something insidious, actively poisoning him. With all due respect, Alara's voice, though soft, carried an unexpected, almost unnerving clarity that cut through the rising panic. His tremors are worsening, not improving. The new medications will only mask the underlying issue. It's a systemic reaction, something he's ingesting or absorbing constantly, something the filters aren't catching. Dr. Thorne's face contorted in a mask of fury. "Are you daring to contradict a world-leading team, Nurse Vance? Are you suggesting our cutting-edge system, the paragon of modern medical technology, is flawed based on your sensory impressions? Perhaps you'd prefer to consult a divining rod, or perhaps a local shaman." Dr. Gupta scoffed, rubbing his temples in exasperation at her audacity. Ms. Albright stared, her eyes narrowed to icy slits of unconcealed contempt. The other nurses froze, their embarrassment for Alara palpable, their gazes flicking nervously between her and the raging doctor. She was ridiculed, branded an ignorant fool in their gleaming temple of science. The humiliation was absolute, a public crucifixion of her professional standing and every ounce of her self-worth. But beneath the searing shame, an unshakable certainty solidified within Alara. Her intuition, once a quiet inner voice, was now a roar. She was right. She had to be. A sudden, violent spasm racked Sterling's body, his back arching with a silent scream. "He's going into another crisis," a junior doctor cried, as the monitors shrieked a flatline alarm that echoed the grim pronouncement. Chaos erupted. Dr. Thorne barked frantic orders, Dr. Gupta moved with desperate, almost clumsy precision, but their efforts were futile. Sterling's vitals plummeted, his heart flickering erratically, then settling into a deathly, shallow rhythm. Dr. Thorne, sweat beading on his brow, glared wildly at the catastrophic readouts, then at Dr. Gupta. "This isn't making sense. Every parameter is off the charts. We've exhausted every conventional avenue. We are losing him." Ms. Albright, her face pale with terror at the sight of her dying employer, turned abruptly to Elara. Her voice, usually so precise, was now hoarse, stripped bare of its usual disdain. "What about what?" Nurse Vance said. "About the water? Is there any chance?" Her eyes, wide and desperate, pleaded with Elara. Dr. Thorne's scoff was weak, desperate. "Preposterous. But what other options do we have? We're losing him." His gaze, a volatile mix of fury, desperation, and scornful, mocking hope, fixed squarely on Elara. "All right, Nurse Vance. Since your intuition is so infallible, and our esteemed science has apparently failed this man, prove it." He gestured wildly at the room, encompassing the failing patient, the advanced equipment, the despairing specialists. "You claim it's the water? Fine. Identify the specific contaminant, the exact source, and what it's doing to him. Tell us what the filters aren't catching and, more importantly, how to fix it, how to stabilize him, right now. And you have precisely 3 hours. If you fail, if Mr. Sterling's condition doesn't improve dramatically, then you will not only be immediately dismissed from this hospital, but I will personally ensure your nursing license is revoked for gross negligence and insubordination. Do you understand?" Dr. Gupta stared, aghast at the sheer recklessness of the challenge. Ms. Albright was a tableau of horror and grim intrigue. The room fell silent once more, save for the frantic, flatlining shriek of Sterling's heart monitor, a stark counterpoint to the impossible demand. Elara felt the weight of their desperate eyes, the crushing enormity of the impossible task, and the chilling threat to her entire career, her very livelihood. But beneath it all, a potent mix of fear and righteous indignation ignited a new kind of resolve. This wasn't just about vindicating her intuition, it was about saving a life the elite had all but given up on. The humiliation had peaked, yes, but now, a chance had been thrown at her, cloaked in professional malice. Her one, impossible chance. She met Dr. Thorne's furious gaze, her own eyes, usually downcast, now steady and piercingly clear, reflecting not timidity, but an unwavering inner strength. "Yes, doctor," she said, her voice quiet but firm, imbued with an unwavering resolve. "I understand. You're right here with us, uncovering truths and making tough choices. Don't miss the next vital revelation or its consequences. If you're invested in how this story of destiny unfolds, subscribe to the channel now. Be part of our ongoing discovery." Elara's yes, doctor hung in the air, a tiny, unassuming pebble dropped into the vast, turbulent ocean of the elite medical world. Thorne's gaze, a mixture of fury and challenge, only seemed to strengthen the quiet fire that had ignited within her. She turned from him, her movements smooth and unhurried, despite the racing beat of her own heart. The eyes of the medical team, sharp with disdain, followed her every step. Dr. Thorne and Dr. Gupta exchanged a knowing, scornful glance, confident in the impending public humiliation of the little nurse. Elara ignored them. Her world narrowed to the patient, Arthur Sterling, and the immediate environment of his opulent, yet increasingly toxic, sick room. The penthouse suite, designed for ultimate comfort and cutting-edge care, now felt like a gilded cage, slowly poisoning its occupant. She didn't need to consult a chart, she simply observed. Her gaze swept over the state-of-the-art bedside console, the meticulously polished chrome of the intravenous stand, the high thread count linens. Nothing here seemed overtly wrong, yet her senses, honed over a lifetime of noticing the unseen, were already prickling. The air, purified and circulated through an advanced HEPA system, carried a faint, almost imperceptible sweetness beneath the sterile scent of antiseptics and expensive wood polish. It was a chemical sweetness, not floral, not sugary, but something subtly metallic, cloying. She moved first to the water dispenser, a sleek, touch-activated unit embedded in a polished stone counter beside Sterling's bed. This wasn't a standard hospital model, it was a bespoke piece, integrated into the suite's private, multi-stage filtration system, promising absolute purity. She observed the empty glass on the nightstand, then the one the patient had just drunk from, now half full. She didn't touch them yet, but noted the way the condensation beaded, perhaps a fraction slower, perhaps with a peculiar sheen. Her eyes drifted to the transparent panels of the bespoke water system itself, part of the suite's living wall aesthetic, a display of glowing filters, circulating liquid, and intricate tubing that showed off its technological prowess. To the untrained eye, it was a marvel of engineering. To Elara, it was a tapestry of potential clues. She leaned in closer to the primary water intake valve within the dispenser, her posture deferential, almost apologetic, yet her focus was absolute. She wasn't looking for obvious grime, the suite was immaculate. She was looking for anomaly. Her gaze traced the rim of the stainless steel spigot, then the inner surface of the glass collection reservoir. There it was. Microscopic, almost iridescent against the polished metal. A crystalline residue, like the finest sugar dusted by an invisible hand, yet it wasn't sugar. It formed a faint, almost imperceptible haze at the very edge where the water met the air, inside the dispenser, and particularly around the primary filter outlet within the system's display panel. It was a unique, delicate pattern, one she'd seen only once before, years ago, near a defunct bauxite mine in the arid plains of her youth, where particular minerals leached into a spring, creating beautiful, yet subtly toxic, formations. Her sense of smell, keen as a hunting hound's, confirmed her visual suspicions. The faint, sweet metallic scent was strongest here, near the filter's output, emanating not from the water itself, but from the interface where the hyperpurified liquid was exposed to the air of the sealed suite. It was the scent of a chemical reaction, slow and insidious. "What exactly are you doing, Nurse Vance?" Dr. Gupta's voice was sharp, laced with impatience. "Poking around like a common housekeeper won't yield any insights where cutting-edge diagnostics have failed." Elara didn't flinch. She straightened slowly, turning to face the assembled specialists. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "Doctors," she began, her voice quiet but clear, "the issue is not with the purity of the water, but with the process by which it is achieved, specifically within this system." She gestured with a gentle hand towards the gleaming water filtration unit behind the transparent panel. Dr. Thorne scoffed, crossing his arms. "Impossible. That is the most advanced, multi-stage purification system on the market. It uses a rare earth mineral membrane, designed for hyperpurification. It strips every conceivable impurity. Our tests confirm its output is beyond pristine." "Precisely, Doctor," Elara replied, her voice gaining a subtle, steel-like edge. "It is the rare earth mineral membrane itself, and its interaction with the hyperpurified water and the unique atmospheric conditions of this sealed suite. This specific membrane, in its quest for absolute purity, is producing a byproduct. A compound, volatile and cumulative, that standard water quality tests do not flag because it is not a contaminant, it's a subtle reaction product of the purification process itself." She stepped forward and pointed, her finger tracing the almost invisible crystalline haze within the clear panel. "Do you see this, Doctor? This faint, almost shimmering residue, particularly around the final stage of the filter output and within the dispensing unit? And the subtle, sweet metallic scent? This is not an impurity, it's a novel mineral complex, forming as the hyperpurified water interacts with the specialized membrane, especially under the specific pressure and temperature gradients unique to this bespoke system. It then vaporizes minutely, infusing the water with a compound that, while perhaps harmless in small doses to a healthy individual, is subtly but consistently debilitating Mr. Sterling, given his already compromised state. It interferes with cellular function, like a silent, invisible antagonist, slowing his recovery and exacerbating his illness." Dr. Gupta leaned in, squinting, then scoffed. "Nurse Vance, you're suggesting this shimmer and ascent is responsible for a multisystemic decline that has baffled the leading minds in medicine? This is unscientific conjecture." "With respect, Doctor," Elara said, her gaze steady, "my observations are based on patterns I've learned from the natural world. Some things are too subtle for machines designed to detect gross impurities. They miss the elegant, insidious dance of chemistry." She looked at Dr. Thorne. "I propose we bypass this specific filtration system entirely for Mr. Sterling's hydration. Switch him to a standard, sealed, medical-grade bottled water supply. And, she added, I suggest a specific, highly sensitive mass spectrometry analysis of the residue I've indicated, targeting volatile organic compounds and rare earth mineral complexes, not just standard inorganic contaminants. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the doctor's indignation and Elara's quiet conviction. Dr. Thorne's face was a mask of furious disbelief, but Elara's precise, almost poetic description of the invisible contaminant, coupled with her unwavering certainty, had planted a seed of doubt, an infuriating, undeniable possibility. Very well, Nurse Vance, Thorne bit out, his voice dangerously low. A complete waste of time, but you've made your ridiculous claim. We will switch Mr. Sterling's water supply. And Dr. Gupta, have the lab conduct a full, unbiased analysis of this residue and a fresh sample from the output. But be warned, nurse, if this is nothing, your tenure here is over. Elara merely nodded, her face betraying no emotion. The challenge had been accepted. Within the hour, Arthur Sterling's fluid was sourced from a different, standard filtered system, and his oral hydration was switched to factory-sealed bottled water. Elara, under the scornful eyes of the medical team, carefully swabbed the microscopic crystalline residue she had identified, placing it in a sterile sample container. The lab, initially briefed with Thorne's dismissive tone, still ran the advanced tests Elara suggested. The wait was agonizing. The tension in the suite was palpable, a silent battle of wills between rigid academia and profound intuition. Thorne and Gupta periodically checked Sterling's vitals, still grim, almost hoping for no change, to prove Elara wrong. But then, an hour after the water switch, a faint, almost imperceptible shift. Arthur Sterling's heart rate, erratic and weak for days, steadied by a beat. His breathing, shallow and strained, deepened fractionally. The monitor, which had been a relentless harbinger of decline, now showed a flicker of hesitant improvement. 2 hours later, the lab results arrived. Dr. Gupta stared at the report, then at Dr. Thorne, his intellectual pride shattering like glass. The analysis confirmed the presence of a previously undetected, complex rare earth mineral compound, a novel interaction product unique to that specific filtration membrane and that specific hyperpurified water. A compound whose properties, when consumed consistently by a compromised patient, could indeed subtly inhibit cellular respiration and nutrient absorption, mimicking a myriad of complex diseases. The suite fell silent, a profound, awestruck hush. Thorne's face, once crimson with anger, now paled to a ghastly white. Gupta's jaw hung slack, his eyes fixed on Elara, who stood quietly by the window, observing the city lights, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The snobbish personal assistant had discreetly vanished. Arthur Sterling's condition continued to stabilize, then, slowly, remarkably, began to improve. The subtle poison, identified and removed, no longer waged its invisible war within him. Elara Vance, the unassuming nurse, had, with her quiet observation and an insight dismissed as unscientific, achieved what the brightest minds and most advanced technology had failed to do. The triumph was not loud, not boastful. It resonated in the hushed tones of the doctors, in their stunned silence, and the dawning respect in their eyes. Elara, her humble insight vindicated, simply watched her patient, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth spreading through her chest. The life that had been slipping away was now clinging, fighting, recovering. And she, the quiet observer, had made all the difference. The rhythmic beep-beep-beep of the cardiac monitor, once a frantic, irregular drumbeat of despair, smoothed into a steady, reassuring cadence. On the large display, Arthur Sterling's oxygen saturation climbed, his blood pressure steadied, and the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor that had racked his limbs began to recede. The improvements were immediate, undeniable, and frankly, baffling to everyone but Elara. Dr. Thorne, his face a mask of disbelief, stared at the readouts. His brow, habitually furrowed in authoritative concern, now registered a profound bewilderment. He leaned closer to the monitor, as if proximity might reveal some trick of the light, some faulty sensor distorting reality. Dr. Gupta, always the pragmatist, was already checking the 4-bag, tracing the line, then meticulously examining the new bottle of water Elara had brought. He sniffed it, a faint, almost imperceptible mineral scent reaching his nostrils, then compared it to the discarded, half-empty bottle that had been sitting on Arthur's bedside table for days. The difference, though subtle, was there. The silence in the opulent suite was no longer the heavy, suffocating blanket of impending loss, but a taut, electric current of astonishment. Every eye in the room, from the specialists who commanded six-figure salaries to the ever-present, watchful personal assistant, now rested on Alara. She remained by Arthur's side, her gaze unwavering, not fixed on the monitors, but on the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the faint return of color to his ashen lips. Her hand, gentle and practiced, rested lightly on his wrist, feeling for the strengthening pulse. She wasn't seeking validation, she was simply doing her job, observing the life-affirming shift she had intuitively known would come. Dr. Thorne finally tore his gaze from the screen, turning to Alara with an expression caught between accusation and a dawning, terrifying understanding. "What, how," he managed, his voice stripped of its usual booming authority, reduced to a hoarse whisper. "It's stabilizing. He's stabilizing." Dr. Gupta, still holding the two water bottles, frowned in deep concentration. He took a small, hesitant sip from the new bottle, then from the old. His refined palate, accustomed to discerning minute variations in expensive wines and coffees, registered something. "There's a note," he murmured, more to himself than to the room. "A very faint, almost metallic tang in the original. The new one, it's cleaner. Distilled, perhaps?" Alara, finally acknowledging their questions, turned her steady, unassuming gaze to them. "The system here is state-of-the-art," she began, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the residual tension like a cool stream. "But sometimes, in older buildings, even with modern upgrades, certain pipe materials can leach microscopic trace elements. Especially if the filtration is too aggressive in some areas, stripping the water of its natural balance, it can exacerbate the issue." She paused, her eyes returning to Arthur. "I noticed a faint, almost powdery residue around the faucet head this morning, different from typical limescale. And the metallic tang Dr. Gupta mentioned, combined with a very subtle, almost floral-like undertone in the room's air purifier, suggested a chemical interaction. My grandmother used to tell me about it, similar issues with her well water if the old iron pipes weren't flushed properly after a dry spell. The combination could create an irritant, particularly for someone already critically compromised, causing cellular inflammation and disrupting electrolyte balance." Her explanation was delivered without flourish, without a hint of "I told you so." It was simply an observation, a connection made between disparate, overlooked details. Yet, in that elite room, filled with minds trained in peer-reviewed journals and double-blind studies, her unscientific explanation landed with the force of a revelation. The doctors, accustomed to grand theories and complex biochemical pathways, found themselves confronted with an answer born of pure, unadulterated perception and a lifetime of practical, almost ancestral, knowledge. Dr. Thorne's shoulders slumped, a visible deflated gesture. The arrogance that usually buoyed him, that had made him dismiss Alara's previous attempts to speak, evaporated. He looked at the humble nurse, clad in her simple uniform, and for the first time, truly saw her. The intellect he had so casually underestimated, the insight he had scorned, had just saved his patient's life, and by extension, his own professional reputation. A faint flush crept up his neck, a mix of humiliation and a grudging, dawning respect. Dr. Gupta, ever the intellectual, found his curiosity overpowering his pride. He approached Alara, a new light in his eyes. "The mineral residue, the floral undertone, you connected those?" "How?" "It's so subtle." "My village," Alara explained simply, a faint, almost wistful smile touching her lips. "We rely heavily on our environment for everything. You learn to read the earth, the water, the air. A sudden bloom of a certain moss means the spring water's pH has shifted. A unique scent from the wildflowers after a rain signals a change in soil composition. It's about patterns, about recognizing the minute deviations from health in a system, whether it's a forest or a human body. The billionaire's personal assistant, Ms. Albright, a woman whose every sartorial choice screamed status, stood frozen by the doorway, her impeccably made-up face uncharacteristically pale. She had scoffed when Alara first approached, had given the nurse a dismissive wave. Now, watching Arthur's breathing deepen, watching the color slowly, miraculously return to his face, she felt a tremor of something akin to awe. Her polished facade cracked just a fraction. She cleared her throat, then, in a voice barely above a whisper, spoke directly to Alara for the first time without a trace of condescension. "So, Mr. Sterling, he'll be all right now?" Alara finally allowed herself a small, serene smile. "He's not out of the woods entirely. He's still very weak. But the immediate threat, the primary irritant, has been removed. His body can finally begin to heal. The next few days will be critical for monitoring, but yes, Ms. Albright. He has a fighting chance. A much, much better one." The collective sigh of relief that swept through the room was palpable, almost audible. The atmosphere, once thick with tension and the unspoken accusation that the elite team was failing, now hummed with a quiet reverence. The cutting-edge machines and renowned specialists had been rendered helpless by something they couldn't see, couldn't measure by conventional means. It was the quiet nurse, the one they had overlooked, whose intuitive wisdom had pierced through the technological noise. The triumph was indeed not loud, not boastful. It resonated in the humbled tones of the doctors, in their stunned silence, and the dawning respect that finally shone in their eyes. Alara, her humble insight vindicated beyond all doubt, simply watched her patient. A profound, almost imperceptible warmth spread through her chest. The life that had been slipping away was now clinging, fighting, recovering. And she, the quiet observer, the unassuming nurse, had made all the difference, not with a scalpel or a complex diagnosis, but with the ancient, enduring power of true observation. The true miracle was not in the advanced technology of the suite, but in the quiet, profound wisdom of a human heart and mind, perfectly attuned to the subtle symphony of life itself. The quiet hum of the suite had replaced the frantic chirps and blares that had dominated the last few days. Arthur Sterling's vital signs, displayed on the sleek monitors, painted an undeniable picture of recovery. His oxygen saturation crept steadily upward, his heart rate stabilized, strong and rhythmic, and the pallor that had painted his face began to recede, replaced by a subtle, returning warmth. The life that had been slipping away was now clinging, fighting, recovering. Dr. Thorne, usually an imposing figure, now paced with an agitated energy that bordered on frantic. He jabbed at a tablet, scrutinizing data that, moments before, had seemed impossible. His creatinine levels are dropping, hepatic markers are normalizing. It's inexplicable. His voice, usually a booming pronouncement, was a strained whisper of disbelief. Dr. Gupta, the renowned diagnostician, had foregone his usual meticulous note-taking, instead staring at the billionaire with an expression of profound intellectual bewilderment. He had run every known test, cross-referenced every obscure syndrome, and yet, the simple act of switching the patient's water source, at the insistence of a quiet nurse, had reversed a trajectory that all their cutting-edge science had deemed irreversible. He kept replaying Alara's simple, almost absurd, suggestion in his mind: the water, a faint metallic scent, a residue. He dismissed it as folk wisdom. Now, it was the only variable. Alara, meanwhile, moved through the suite with her characteristic quiet efficiency, adjusting a blanket, checking the 4 drip lines with gentle, knowing hands. She didn't gloat, didn't even offer an "I told you so." Her presence was a testament, not a challenge. The memory of their condescending laughter, of Dr. Thorne's scathing remarks about unscientific musings, and Dr. Gupta's dismissive wave, lingered in the air, a silent counterpoint to the monitor's steady, triumphant beeps. Arthur Sterling's personal assistant, Ms. Albright, a woman whose meticulously styled hair and sharp suits usually commanded deference, now hovered at the foot of the bed, her face a mask of awe and relief. She had witnessed the rapid decline, the doctor's increasing desperation, and then, the astonishing turnaround. She caught Alara's eye, a flicker of something akin to profound respect replacing her usual disdain. Dr. Gupta, unable to reconcile the scientific impossibly with the undeniable reality, finally snatched up his tablet. The new water supply, he muttered, almost to himself, where is it sourced? And what was the original? Have we analyzed the original municipal supply for any anomalies? His intellectual pride was still battling with humility, but the results were too stark to ignore. He began furiously searching obscure medical journals, looking for any precedent, any scientific backing for such an improbable environmental factor. Hours later, the suite remained charged with a different kind of tension. Arthur Sterling was stirring, his eyelids fluttering, a soft groan escaping his lips. Dr. Thorne rushed forward, his professional mask firmly back in place, ready to take credit for the successful stabilization. But as Sterling's eyes finally opened, hazy at first, then focusing with surprising clarity, they bypassed the imposing figure of Dr. Thorne, the brilliant Dr. Gupta, and the attentive Ms. Albright. His gaze, weak but direct, settled on Alara, who stood modestly in the background, making a routine adjustment to a flow meter. This was the maximum impact moment, the billionaire, who had built an empire on seeing what others missed, whose life had just been saved by the same principle, offered no grand pronouncement. Instead, a faint smile touched his lips, and his voice, raspy but clear, cut through the hushed tension of the room. The water, it tastes clean. It was simple, profound, and devastatingly final in its quiet validation. Dr. Thorne's shoulders visibly slumped. Dr. Gupta, tablet still clutched in his hand, found an obscure paper detailing a rare mineral contamination affecting neural pathways, a contamination found in certain regional water supplies. The specific mineral Alara had likely intuited. The scientific validation was suddenly, belatedly, there. He looked at Alara, not with intellectual pride, but with a dawning, humbling understanding. Nurse Vance, Dr. Gupta finally said, his voice stripped of its former condescension, resonant with a newfound, heavy respect. Your observation, it was not merely intuitive. It was profoundly accurate. My team has identified a trace element in the original supply, one that, in sustained high concentrations, could indeed have contributed to Mr. Sterling's neurological decline. An element almost universally dismissed in standard water quality assessments, but one that aligns perfectly with your description. He paused, then, meeting Alara's calm, unassuming gaze, he added, We simply missed it. You saw what we, with all our advanced equipment and exhaustive training, overlooked. Dr. Thorne, though his face remained a study in conflicted pride and professional defeat, finally cleared his throat. Nurse Vance, he began, his voice surprisingly subdued, your diligence, your unique insight, has been instrumental. Crucial, in fact. We are all indebted to your perspective. It was not an apology, but coming from him, it was an admission of defeat and respect far more potent. The elite doctors, silenced and humbled, looked at the unassuming nurse not as an subordinate, but as the quiet architect of a miracle they could not replicate. Ms. Albright, tears welling in her eyes, stepped forward and, to everyone's astonishment, gently took Alara's hand. Thank you, Alara, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing what no one else could. Alara simply offered a small, polite nod, her expression calm, her deep empathy radiating softly. She had saved a life, not with grand pronouncements or technological marvels, but with the ancient, enduring power of true observation, perfectly attuned to the subtle symphony of life itself. The suite, once a bastion of rigid, elitist academia, now hummed with the quiet, profound wisdom of a human heart and mind. The true miracle was not in the advanced technology of the suite, but in the quiet, profound wisdom of a human heart and mind, perfectly attuned to the subtle symphony of life itself. The true miracle was not in the advanced technology of the suite, but in the quiet, profound wisdom of a human heart and mind, perfectly attuned to the subtle symphony of life itself. Her simple uniform, once a symbol of her lower status, now seemed to glow with a quiet, undeniable triumph. The monitors in Arthur Sterling's penthouse suite, which for days had sung a discordant symphony of decline, now hummed a different tune. Steadily, undeniably, the jagged peaks on the screen smoothed, the erratic rhythms found their beat, and the frantic alarms fell silent. A collective gasp, barely audible, rippled through the room. The shift was too immediate, too profound, to be coincidence. Elara Vance, her back to the stunned assembly, continued her meticulous work, adjusting a drip, smoothing a sheet. Her hands, steady and unhurried, betrayed none of the profound internal relief she felt. She didn't look up, didn't seek affirmation. Her victory was not for public consumption, but for the silent, unwavering conviction within her own heart. Yet, every eye in the room was now fixed on her simple, unadorned uniform, on the unassuming figure who had dared to see what the titans of medicine had missed. The air, thick moments ago with tension and professional hubris, now thrummed with a different kind of charge, awe, regret, and a dawning, terrible realization. Dr. Thorne, his face a mask of disbelief, stumbled backward, almost colliding with a rolling floor stand. His usually commanding voice was reduced to a hoarse whisper. It's impossible. A temporary fluctuation. We must run more tests." But even as he spoke, the words rang hollow. Arthur Sterling's vitals weren't just stabilizing, they were improving at an unprecedented rate, a clear rebound from the brink. The pallor began to recede from the billionaire's face, his breathing deepened, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of returning life passing through his limbs. A hush descended, broken only by the quiet beeps of the medical equipment and Elara's soft, measured footsteps. The other nurses, who had witnessed her quiet struggle against the tide of dismissal, exchanged knowing glances. Their eyes, once filled with pity for her perceived naivete, now gleamed with a fierce, protective pride. Arthur Sterling's sister, a formidable woman who had flown in from Geneva, stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as it pierced through Dr. Thorne, then settled on Elara with a look of profound, dawning gratitude. "Nurse Vance," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "what was it you changed?" Elara turned, her blue eyes calm, her expression unreadable. "The water for Mr. Sterling's rehydration, ma'am. We switched to distilled." The simplicity of the answer was staggering, almost comedic in its stark contrast to the complex, multi-million-dollar diagnostics that had failed. Dr. Gupta, the renowned diagnostician, felt a cold dread seep into his bones. His intellect, his lifelong companion and greatest source of pride, felt suddenly fragile, utterly humiliated. He had dismissed Elara's observation as remedial, an insult to his years of advanced study. Now, the patient was demonstrably improving, not because of his sophisticated algorithms or rare disease theories, but because of a simple, fundamental truth that had been whispered by a quiet nurse. He looked at his hands, feeling them tremble, and a wave of nausea swept over him. The hospital administrator, Mr. Henderson, a man whose presence usually commanded instant deference, now looked small and pale. He cleared his throat. "Dr. Thorne, Dr. Gupta, I believe we need to discuss the implications of this." His gaze, usually sharp and calculating, lingered on Elara with a new, unsettling respect. The karmic consequences began to unfold swiftly, a relentless current washing away the foundations of their professional arrogance. Dr. Thorne, who had reveled in his position as lead physician and consistently belittled Elara's suggestions, found his authority crumbling around him. The hospital board, alerted by Sterling's sister and now keenly aware of the near-fatal misdiagnosis, launched an immediate internal review. The phrase gross negligence was whispered in hushed tones down the hospital corridors. His once unblemished reputation as a cutting-edge physician was now marred by a colossal oversight. His face, usually flushed with self-importance, was now a ghastly white. He attempted to argue, to rationalize, to claim he had been about to consider other environmental factors, but his words were empty, drowned out by the irrefutable evidence of Arthur Sterling's recovery. He was stripped of his lead role on the Sterling case within the hour, a public, humiliating demotion that echoed through the entire institution. His professional world, meticulously built on a foundation of unshakable self-belief, was now a pile of rubble. Dr. Gupta, whose intellectual pride had led him to dismiss Elara's unscientific observations, suffered a far more insidious, internal consequence. His diagnostic prowess, his very identity as a brilliant medical mind, was shattered. The knowledge that he, with all his advanced degrees and published papers, had been bested by a nurse's simple, intuitive understanding, was a bitter pill. He found himself unable to meet Elara's gaze, or indeed, anyone's. The intellectual edifice he had built, brick by brick, crumbled under the weight of his own arrogance. He quietly excused himself, not to offer an apology, but to retreat into the shame of his own perceived intellectual failure, a shame that would haunt his future consultations and dim the luster of his renowned status. The very foundation of his scientific worldview had been challenged and found wanting by the quiet wisdom of an attuned heart. Even Arthur Sterling's personal assistant, Ms. Albright, who had looked down on Alara with such snobbish disdain, found her carefully cultivated image of efficiency and elite access disintegrating. She had been instructed by the family to vet all medical staff and had dismissed Alara as a mere grunt. Now, it was revealed that she had actively stood in the way of the very solution that saved her employer's life, echoing the doctor's dismissive attitude. Sterling's sister, a woman who valued competence above all else, cast a glance at Ms. Albright that spoke volumes of disappointment and impending dismissal. Ms. Albright stammered an apology to Alara, a stark reversal of her earlier scorn, but it was too little, too late. Her position, once secure, was now precariously balanced, her judgment shown to be superficial and ultimately detrimental. Alara, amidst the chaos of shifting power dynamics and unfolding reckonings, remained Alara. When Arthur Sterling, still weak but unmistakably alert, finally opened his eyes and murmured a confused "water, tastes different," a small, knowing smile touched her lips. She simply nodded, her hand resting gently on his wrist, checking his pulse. Her triumph wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet affirmation of the subtle, often overlooked truths of the world, a testament to the power of observation honed not in textbooks, but in the rich, earthy wisdom of life itself. Her simple uniform, once a symbol of her lower status, now seemed to glow with a quiet, undeniable triumph, a beacon of humility in a room once dominated by unseeing pride. The air in the penthouse suite hung heavy, thick with the silence that follows an undeniable truth. Arthur Sterling's breathing, once shallow and ragged, had deepened into a steady, even rhythm. The faint pallor that had clung to his skin for weeks began to recede, replaced by a delicate flush of returning life. His pulse, which Alara still held gently, thrummed with a newfound, vigorous strength. Her simple nod was not a gesture of pride, but one of profound relief. A life was turning back from the brink. Across the room, the elite doctors stood frozen, their faces a tableau of disbelief and dawning horror. Dr. Thorne, usually so poised and self-assured, looked as if he'd been struck. His jaw, typically firm, hung slightly ajar, his eyes darting between Sterling's revitalized form and Alara's quiet, unassuming presence. The dismissive sneer that often graced his lips had vanished, replaced by a sickly green tinge. His professional world, built on layers of academic prestige and unshakable authority, was crumbling before his very eyes, shattered by a nurse whose name he barely remembered. Dr. Gupta, the renowned diagnostician whose intellect was her fortress, seemed to shrink. The pride that usually radiated from her, a palpable aura of superior knowledge, evaporated into shame. Her meticulously constructed theories, her intricate flowcharts of possibilities, had all missed the obvious, the fundamental, the simple. The quiet, persistent nurse, whom she had deemed utterly irrelevant, had seen what her advanced degrees and cutting-edge instruments had not. Her mind, usually a whirl of complex thoughts, was now a painful void, filled only with the echo of Alara's soft, ignored voice. Even Sterling's personal assistant, a sharp woman named Miss Chen who had perfected the art of the condescending glance, found her meticulously arranged composure fraying. Her initial scoffing had turned into an aghast silence. She now regarded Alara with a mixture of terror and a dawning, unwilling respect, knowing the billionaire would not soon forget who had truly saved him. Slowly, carefully, Alara released Sterling's wrist. She moved to the side, allowing the still paralyzed team to observe the undeniable shift in his condition. There was no "I told you so" in her demeanor, no triumphant glare. Her gaze remained fixed on Sterling, her quiet compassion evident. It took another hour for the full scientific confirmation to arrive. The advanced diagnostic equipment, now directed to analyze the filtered water from the penthouse suite's supply, quickly identified the specific, minuscule traces of a rare metallic compound, a byproduct of an older pipe system recently reactivated in the building's lower levels, combined with a particular mineral composition unique to the city's lesser-used emergency water reservoir. Individually harmless, in combination and sustained exposure, especially to a weakened system like Sterling's, it had been a silent poison. Elara's intuitive detection of a faint metallic scent, a unique plant aroma, had been startlingly accurate, an indicator of the complex interaction of these substances. The revelations hit the elite team like a physical blow. Dr. Thorne, stripped of his professional mask, tried to offer a convoluted explanation, citing unforeseen environmental variables and anomalous water compositions. But his words rang hollow, even to his own ears. Sterling, though still weak, was lucid enough to understand. His sharp, entrepreneurial mind cut through the prevarication. "Get them out," Sterling rasped, his voice still faint but carrying an unmistakable authority, gesturing vaguely at Thorne and Gupta. "And make sure this oversight is thoroughly investigated. Someone almost died from negligence born of arrogance." The fallout was swift and brutal. Dr. Thorne, whose career had soared on a wing of impeccable diagnoses and elite connections, found himself publicly disgraced. The hospital's board, keen to avoid a catastrophic lawsuit and protect its reputation, initiated a full inquiry that systematically dismantled his professional standing. He was stripped of his lead physician role, his prestigious university appointments revoked, and his future in top-tier medicine was effectively over. His arrogance, once his shield, became the instrument of his downfall. Dr. Gupta, though perhaps suffering less public ignominy, faced a deeper, more personal reckoning. Her intellectual pride, once her most cherished asset, now felt like a crushing weight. The flawless diagnostic record she had cultivated was irrevocably tainted. She withdrew from her high-profile research projects, seeking solace in a reclusive study of holistic medicine, an ironic twist for someone who had so vehemently dismissed anything not traditionally scientific. Miss Chen, Sterling's assistant, was quietly but firmly dismissed, her judgment called into question not just by her snobbery, but by her failure to ensure her boss's fundamental safety, despite being privy to Elara's ignored warning. Elara, however, remained untouched by the swirling drama of ambition and consequence. Arthur Sterling, once fully recovered, offered her a blank check, a position as his personal healthcare consultant, even funding for her own research facility. She listened patiently, a faint, understanding smile on her lips. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft but firm, "my reward is seeing you well. And perhaps, a suggestion." He leaned forward, intrigued. "Anything." "Just listen more," she replied. "To everyone. To the quiet voices. The world has more to tell us than what's in the textbooks." She gently declined the vast sums, the grand titles. Her ambition was not for prestige or wealth. Her ambition was to heal, to observe, to connect with the subtle rhythms of life. She accepted only a modest donation for the rural community health clinic she occasionally volunteered at, a clinic that served people who, like her, understood the earth, the water, and the quiet signs of distress. Within a week, Elara was back on her regular ward, pulling 12-hour shifts, changing dressings, administering medication, comforting the anxious. The other nurses and even some of the junior doctors now looked at her with an awe she found slightly uncomfortable. They called her the Oracle, though she merely smiled and reminded them to check the patient's hydration. Her simple uniform still fit perfectly. Her practical shoes still carried her silently through the hospital corridors. She still wore minimal makeup. Nothing outwardly had changed. But everything within her had. The validation of her intuition had been profound, a quiet affirmation not of her superiority, but of the intrinsic worth of her way of seeing the world. She didn't need the flashing lights of fame or the accolades of the elite. Her value wasn't contingent on a billionaire's approval or an elite doctor's grudging respect. It was inherent, woven into the fabric of her being, nurtured by the earthy wisdom of her upbringing and the simple, profound act of caring. Elara Vance found her greatest satisfaction not in the grand pronouncements or the intricate medical debates, but in the soft glow of a patient's returning health, in the unnoticed detail that could make all the difference, in the quiet, steady rhythm of life itself. Her triumph had been silent, her justice unseen by most, but her peace was absolute. She understood that true worth wasn't something granted by external forces, but a deeply rooted knowing, a quiet strength that hummed within her, as steady and true as a healthy heartbeat. And that, for Alara, was more than enough. All right, you've reached the end of our journey, and I truly hope this story left you feeling inspired. Remember this, your own strength and unique path are your greatest assets. Every challenge is a stepping stone. You possess immense power within you. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What aspect of this story resonated most deeply? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's build a vibrant community where we can all connect and uplift one another. And if you're eager for more tales that ignite the spirit and encourage growth, please hit that follow button. Join us as we continue to explore human potential. Your support fuels this channel, and I'm excited for what we'll discover together.